Thank you, Dave. That was a very kind introduction, much more kind than I probably deserve. I've got so many friends here in South Carolina. I see Jerry McDaniel, who was our first hire in the state of South Carolina when we talked about running the campaign. And let me tell you something about Jerry. She's tough. If you don't know Jerry, she's tough. So we start this little campaign, and I have this privilege to meet this great man named Donald Trump, and he says, why don't you meet me in South Carolina 3 years ago on this very day for our first event. He flies up from Mar-a-Lago, and I fly down from New Hampshire, and we meet here, run into Jerry and Joe, and then candidate Trump speaks, and I call Jerry 3 weeks later, and I say, hey, why don't you come and think about joining the campaign? I'd like you to work for us in South Carolina. She says, not until I sit down with Donald Trump. I said, what? She says, not till you fly me to New York, wine me and dine me, and let me sit down with Donald Trump. And Jerry flew up to New York, and she sat across the desk from Mr. Trump, and she didn't give him a pass. She asked him all the hard questions. Why are you doing this? Are you serious? Are you really going to run? Why do you want to give up this great lifestyle you have? And she walked out of that meeting with then Mr. Trump. It was one of our very first hires to go on to be what was a historic election where Donald Trump defeated 16 Republicans in the primary and went on to beat the Clinton cabal in the general election. And I had the privilege of being part of that historic victory and having a front row seat of history. And while the campaign was amazing, it's important to look back now. 1 year ago today, our president was sworn in as the 45th president of the United States. And let's just think about that. It has been 1 year ago today, almost at this very hour, where he stood, raised his hand to God, and made that amazing pledge. So in the book that I write, I talk all about the campaign and the great things that we did and the fun we had and what it was like on Trump Force One and what it was like to be part of those presidential debates and what it was like in the general election and even what it was like after the president was sworn in and some of my time visiting with him in the Oval Office. But I want to just run through with you some of the accomplishments in the first year. Because if you believe the fake news media, they'll tell you he hasn't done anything. He's got nothing done in the first year, because they don't want to give him the credit he deserves. So let's just think about it. Record high stock market. The highest stock market growth, 31% in the first year of a president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt has come to office. $2.2 million jobs created, $7 trillion in stock market value in the first year. Lowest unemployment, 4.1%. Lowest unemployment recorded in both the African-American community and the Hispanic community ever on record under this administration, ever. For every new government regulation that's put in place, 22 have been taken out of the system. And what that means is confidence so businesses can go and hire more people, make capital investments, and get our economy growing again. That's the Trump agenda. Immigration. We are at a 46-year low for illegal border crossings. It is something that the candidate pledged to do and is something that he has allowed the Department of Homeland Security to enforce, which is to allow our ICE agents to go and do their job and stop people from coming into our country illegally and killing American citizens. And you wouldn't believe this? There are people who don't want to see that continue. Ask the Kate Steinle family from California what it was like. Ask the family who just this week you saw the news story. An illegal alien who came across the border, killed 2 police officers, sat in open court, admitted to killing them, and only said, I wish I could kill some more. This is what is coming into our country. We are a sovereign nation. We have a responsibility, a right, and an obligation to our citizens to make sure that we are protecting them from all enemies, both foreign and domestic, and that means a wall on the southern border. Let's look at what Donald Trump has done the first year in the court system. In addition to Neil Gorsuch, who is by far one of the best candidates and now Supreme Court justices that we will see in a lifetime, because he will have a long-term fundamental difference on the high court. Look at what he has done on all the other courts. Donald Trump has gotten confirmed in 1 year more judges than any president in the history of our country, because what we have seen is that these liberal judges on the Ninth Circuit and on the Fourth Circuit, they want to legislate from the bench. And what I say to them is, if you want to be a legislator, retire your position as a federal judge and go and run for office so you can make policy. Don't legislate from the bench. And Donald Trump is now stopping that from taking place. Our military, our great military, the confidence that they now have again serving under a leader who is well respected around the world. ISIS has lost 98% of the territory that they had under the Trump administration. 98% of what ISIS had has now been decimated. VA Accountability Act, giving veterans the opportunity to have the health care that they need, has been implemented under this administration and not the previous one. This administration makes sure that the law enforcement officers, our first responders, and our military have the tools that they need to be successful. And this Schumer shutdown that we have, you know what it has done? It has put non-U.S. citizens in front of our military. It is said that people who don't belong in this country because they're here illegal are more important than the people who came here legally and serve our country every day. That's what this shutdown has done today, and it needs to stop, and we need to make sure the military has all the resources they need, and we need to get the government back open. But the thing that's most troubling to me in the first year of this administration is something that you are very well aware of. And kid you not, it is real. It is called the deep state, and it is very real. These are the holdover bureaucrats and unelected officials who serve from administration to administration and do so at the detriment of our president and the people that he appoints. Just look at what has taken place from our former FBI director, Jim Comey. Jim Comey has publicly admitted now, under oath in Congress, that he took information he received as the director of the FBI and gave it to a law professor so that that information could be put in the public domain so that Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, will recuse himself from a fake witch hunt Russia investigation. And you know what, Jim Comey? That's illegal. And you know what, Jim Comey, who has stood in front of Congress and lied under oath on multiple occasions, we call that perjury in the real world. And I want to know where the accountability is on Jim Comey for lying to Congress and doing the things that are illegal. If it was just Jim Comey, we'd be okay, but it's not. Look at these other FBI guys, right? Look at these individuals who are senior members of the FBI who, number one, were at Hillary Clinton's election night party in New York because they thought she was going to win. They're the same ones who had the opportunity to change the language of the Clinton investigation before they ever even finished the interview process to say that there was nothing wrong with what she did. They're the same ones that put Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin in a room and didn't put them under oath, didn't hold them accountable, and then turned around and had a different set of rules for General Mike Flynn, who is now a convicted felon for lying to the FBI. Do not kid yourself. Those same very FBI agents, one of which who was having an affair with an attorney in the FBI, who has not been fired, has just reassigned to the Human Resources Department, if you can believe this, said, we need to have an insurance policy in case Donald Trump wins the election. What we need to see today is the memorandum that Congress has that they are holding that they will not turn over. That memo was not a classified document. That can be released under House Rule 10, and it should be in the air of transparency. They should release that memo because what it will show, in my opinion, is that this fake dossier that both the Clinton campaign and members of the FBI paid for to a former MI6 spy who went to Russia to create a bunch of false narratives against our candidate, the president, was used for a FISA warrant. They used that fake information that the Clinton campaign paid for, went to a federal judge, asked for a FISA warrant to start spying on American citizens on our own very soil. That is the biggest breach of the Fourth Amendment. It makes Watergate look like a little candy store break-in. And what we need is accountability. Because there has not been accountability for people under the Clinton cabal and the Obama administration who unmasked American citizens for political gain. They should be held accountable and they should go to jail. So, what do we do? What do we do? We've got an administration that I can tell you, coming into the November elections, if we don't show up and make sure the Republicans keep control of the House, let me just tell you what the statistics are so you're well aware of it. Okay? On the Senate side, there's 35 U.S. senators up for re-election, 25 which are Democrats, 10 of which are sitting in states that Donald Trump won in the last election cycle. States like Florida and West Virginia and Missouri and North Dakota and Montana. They're not voting with the president. So we need to make sure that those guys get removed and they get on the president's agenda. That's number one. But number two, and much more important to us, we've got 32 Republican members of the House that have already announced they're either retiring or seeking a different office. And then we've got another 10 or 12 sitting in very competitive House seats that even under the best of circumstances are going to have a difficult time getting reelected in 2018. If the Democrats take back the House in 2018 and we end up with Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Chairman Jerry Nadler of New York, think about what their first course of business will be. Now, they won't tell you this, but I'm going to tell you the truth because that's all I know how to do because I'm a poor kid from Lowell, Massachusetts. So I'm going to tell you the truth. They will immediately begin impeachment proceedings against the President of the United States. They will spend the next year and a half attacking this president over a false narrative which doesn't exist. So let me tell you, in as clear of terms as I can give you, I sat next to candidate Trump for almost 2 years. Every day, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was with him more than his wife or his family or anybody else in the world. There was no collusion. There was no coordination. There was no cooperation. There was nothing between our campaign and any outside entity to try and impact the outcome of an election. But if there was, by anybody, and what we know is the only campaign that paid for a dossier was the Clinton campaign, then every single person who's responsible for that should go to jail for the rest of their lives. Our election system is too important, but the Democrats don't care about that. And they will, if they take control of the House, move to impeach this president. They will stop his legislative agenda. We will not get Obamacare repeal and replace done. We will not get a transportation infrastructure spending bill done. And for the next 2 years of his presidency, from 2019 and 2020 to his reelection effort, we will see a broken Washington that gets nothing done. And so I ask you, I implore you, and I demand you to make sure that every congressional district in this country that we have an opportunity to hold or win as Republicans does so, because this will come down to a very small group of congressional districts. And if Speaker Pelosi takes that gavel back, I can tell you what, our country as we now know it will fundamentally change. And the Trump agenda, which has been a strong economy, a strong national security, putting us as leaders in the world again. Simple philosophy, America first. It's America first. We cut $285 million out of the UN budget. You know why? Because it's a bloated, broken system, and they weren't putting America first. We have to put our country first. Donald Trump was not elected as the Prime Minister of Canada or the Chancellor of Germany. But when he got on those airplanes and he flew overseas to Saudi Arabia and Israel and Rome and China, the respect that they paid to this man, because they understand This is not a man who takes things lightly. This is not a man, unlike the previous administration, who draws a line in the sand in Syria and lets someone walk over it and walk over it and walk over it again. That doesn't happen here. And what this president has said, and I am completely resolved with this, if China and Kim Jong-un launches a missile at Guam or a U.S. territory, that is a declaration of war, and the United States will respond times 10 and wipe them off the face of the earth. That is how serious he is. And so, I ask for your help and I ask for your support. For a president who, through his own sheer will and veracity and stamina and Twitter, forces people to listen. Because if it wasn't for Twitter, guys, we'd be believing the fake news. So let me just give you a couple of the fake news awards that the president gave out this week. I'm sure you remember them. It was amazing. 1 year ago today, the first fake news story appeared. And it was Zeke Miller from Time Magazine, who had the privilege of going into the Oval Office that day with a camera. And he took a picture in the Oval Office and he said, "Donald Trump is a racist. He has removed the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the Oval Office." Well, 6,000 media outlets picked up that story and republished it as factually accurate. Zeke didn't pick up the phone and call Sean Spicer or someone else in the White House to ask. He just published it as fact. And you know where that bust of Martin Luther King Jr. was? Behind the Secret Service agent, the exact same spot it was for the last 6 years under the Obama administration. There was no apology. Maybe on page A97 and 2.2 font, oops, we made a mistake. But that's not what the narrative is that they wanted. How about just a couple weeks ago? The president goes down to Pensacola, Florida, has a little bit of a rally, puts about 25,000 people in a venue. And the Washington Post, Eric Weigel, takes a picture and says, "Packed to the rafters." 6 hours before the president comes, he shows the place is empty. So the president has to fight back with his Twitter account. Oops, I didn't mean to be dishonest. Of course you did. This is what you guys do for a living. You're dishonest. How about Brian Ross of ABC News, who, because of his false reporting, had the stock market drop 350 points because he said something that wasn't true, and they don't fire this clown, right? They just reassign him because there's no accountability in the media. Look, and I won't even get into CNN and MSNBC. It's just all fake news there. I won't even get into example after example over there. But without the president's Twitter account and his ability to fight back, we would believe most of the things that the media tells us. But the American people are smart. You saw the story just this week. 91% of the coverage of this administration has been deemed negative by the Media Research Center. Did anybody see the press conference this week from the physician from the Navy? All right, let me ask you a different way. Did anybody not see the press conference? Right? It's amazing. This guy he's got like 17 letters after his last name because that's how smart he is, right? He's like an admiral in the Navy. He was Barack Obama's physician. He was George W. Bush's physician. He goes out and he sits there for 45 minutes and answers every question that the media has to offer. And he says, "Donald Trump is so healthy, I am confident that not only will he finish out this term, but if he runs again and wins, he'll finish out the next term." And they said, "What is his waistline size, sir?" Would he stand on a scale to say he's 239 pounds? No one said, "How many packs of cigarettes a day does Barack Obama smoke?" Right? Nobody said that. The double treatment that everything regarding the president gets is so outraged, you have to make sure you're getting the real news. And I don't know how many of you are on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, but the president can now reach over 100 million people instantly, and that is the only way we get the message out. And so, look, I'll stop with this because I want to tell you how thankful I am, but I'm going to tell you one story about my first time in my life of going to the Oval Office. The President of the United States is sworn in on January 20th of last year, and he's a pretty busy guy. And so I have the privilege of talking to him on the telephone on a fairly regular basis. But I had not gone in to see him until about mid-February. So he'd been in office now for about 3 weeks. And he called me up and he said, "Cory." And I said, "Yes, Mr. President." And he says, "Would you come see me?" I said, "Of course, sir." So I go to the White House. I go through the security. And I'm escorted into what is really the outer sanctum of the Oval Office where 3 people sit. And the door is open, and I can look inside this amazing room. And I see my friend, the president, Donald J. Trump, sitting behind the Resolute desk. And he's sitting there, and I'm on the outside of the room. And to his right, my far left, is the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. And the president looks out, and he sees me, and he says, "Hey, get in here." And so I step across this amazing threshold into the Oval Office, a place where I had never been before in my life because I'm a poor kid from Lowell, Massachusetts who grew up with no privilege. And I walked into that room and thought about all the major decisions that had been made in that room. And the President of the United States stood up, and he said to Mike Pence, who was standing there, he said, "Mike, do you know who this is?" And the Vice President turned and he said, "Yes, sir. That's Cory." And the President said to him a second time, "Mike, do you know who this is?" And he said, "Why, yes, Mr. President, it's Cory Lewandowski. I know exactly who that is." And he said, "Mike, this is the man who said you could be the Vice President of the United States." And I said, "Well, sir, with all due respect, 60 million people said that." Because I was the chairman of the Vice Presidential Selection Committee, so I had the honor and privilege of vetting candidates to be the Vice President of the United States, and I chose Mike Pence with the consultation of others. And then the Vice President stood up, and he said, "Cory, take my seat." And I said, "Mr. Vice President, I cannot do that." He said, "Please take my seat." I said, "No, sir. I'll sit next to you." So I sat to the Vice President's right, directly in front of the President. The Vice President was to my left. And we talked for a few minutes. And then the Vice President turned to me and he said, "Cory, I need to ask you a favor." And I said, "Mr. Vice President, I'll do anything." He said, "I have to give a speech this evening, and I want to make sure I represent my country and my family properly. Will you bow your head and pray with me?" And I sat there, put my head down. The President put his head down. And the Vice President of the United States asked for God's help in representing our country. In a speech that he gave that very evening. And I've never been so humbled in my life. I have the privilege to know that the men who are leading our country have their faith in God and want to do what is best for our country and ask for his help and forgiveness every day. And we finished that prayer, and the Vice President stood up, and I stood up and I shook his hand. And then the President stood up and he said, "Now, Mike, get the hell out of here and don't screw up tonight." Which I thought was pretty cool. And then I got up and spent a little more time with the President, and I walked out of that Oval Office, and I knew at that very moment that all the sacrifices that I had made at times away from my family on the road were all worth it. Because my children, and God willing, my grandchildren, don't have a better country than I had when I started. That's my fault and shame on me. And I am so very grateful and thankful that we have the leadership we do in this country, because the converse would have been devastating. So I want to tell you, because I've seen it firsthand, I've seen it and I've witnessed it, how fortunate we are to have our president as Donald J. Trump and our vice president as Michael Pence. Without them, our country would go on a very different path. So thank you, and continue to pray for them. They need our help too. Thank you very much.